All right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us for tonight's program on West Virginia Meats Regulations. It's brought to you as part of the West Virginia Agri-Meats Excellence Series. My name is Holly Morgan, and we are thrilled to welcome you to this important and timely discussion. Before we dive in, I'm sure you guys are all dealing with the snow as I am up here. So if your internet's going to dip out, we understand. We had some people with some internet issues before we got started, so we are definitely understanding of that. Just as you prepare for snow and weather with shovels and salt and warm clothes, risk management, which is what we're here to talk about tonight, really, is about getting ready for the unexpected in your agricultural business. So tonight's program is going to help you better understand the rules and regulations that govern meat production and sales in West Virginia, and that will help you to manage the risk and maintain compliance in your operation. So this webinar series is made possible through funding from the Northeast Extension Risk Management Program, ERME, if I ever put that in an email, if you're in contact with me by email about this program. ERME is dedicated to helping agricultural producers improve their ability to manage the risks in critical areas such as production, marketing, finance, legal concerns, and human resources. So we are talking about production risk. Marketing risk will be kind of later on when we talk about marketing your meat products. And we're talking about diversifying too, because a lot of times we have people that are joining the meat business. They're interested in getting started. Maybe they have a little bit of information. They want to know what's out there. So this is for you as well. We ERME supports programs like this one because it wants to ensure that farmers and producers have the access to the resources that they need to grow their businesses. So tonight's topic, meat regulations, obviously very important for anybody involved in the meat industry, whether you're producing, selling, or just starting out. We're going to cover the requirements you need to know. And tonight we have with us Quentin Jones. He's the West Virginia Department of Agriculture Assistant Director for the Meat and Poultry Inspection Bureau in the Animal Health Division. So welcome, Quentin, on this snowy evening. And as we go through the program, Quentin is okay with asking questions in the moment. That way, as he said, you can strike when the iron's hot. So if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand. If you're on a computer, it has a little button there that you can raise your hand somewhere down here on the side. Or if you want to pop your questions in the chat, I will try to keep an eye on those and make sure that I can read those for Quentin as well. That's another way you can do it. Or if you can't do either one of those, maybe you're on the phone, you can just pop in and take yourself off mute and we will answer your questions that way. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Quentin and let him take over.
All right. Thank you, Holly, and thanks everybody for joining this evening. I am here in the West Virginia Department of Agriculture. Very briefly, the West Virginia Department of Agriculture does have a cooperative agreement with the USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture's Meat and Inspection Agency, which is what is called Food Safety Inspection Service, or FSIS for short. And because of that cooperative agreement, we take on a role here in West Virginia that is at least equal to what FSIS would provide. There are about 30 states around the country that have their own state meat inspection program. Like West Virginia, we're all required pretty much to do the same things as the FSIS, the Federal Meat Inspection Agency, would do. Our regulations are very much the same as the federal regulations. But I think we in the state programs do typically provide a little more outreach, a little more technical assistance to perhaps our licensees, and probably just make ourselves a little more available. And I'm very happy to do that this evening. And as Holly said, by all means, we want to answer your questions. That's in everybody's best interest. So whatever you need to do, stop me, or if necessary, make some notes. And at the very end, we'll have a time to take some questions and answers. So as I begin to try to share this screen, I'm going to go over what the things you need to be considering when planning on selling meat here in the state of West Virginia.
Quentin, have you changed your screen yet?
Okay, can you see?
Yep, now it is on.
Okay, very good. So I think there's just a slight overlap with the idea of marketing, and I know that others will be addressing that issue here in some of your other webinars and meetings. But I think that is a very important part. I don't deal with the marketing of meat or poultry products per se. I'm on the regulatory side of things, making sure that it's done in accordance with the appropriate rules and that overall food safety is achieved. But I think whenever you start thinking about what you want to do as a producer, you have to think about what it is that you're wanting to presumably sell. And when I say that, I guess what I'm kind of thinking is, well, are you really thinking about selling to an end consumer? That would be a customer that might, for example, walk into a grocery store and buy a product that takes home and they take it home and then they use it for their family immediately, or are you thinking about selling maybe in a larger sense, large like freezer beef or a hog that might be put away for um, consumption by a family over a period of time? And then you could also be thinking about, well, do I want to be able to accommodate retail stores as a supplier, wholesale supplier to those folks and those businesses or restaurants, or do I plan to sell at a farmer's market? Because I think this is going to have some effect upon how you go about setting up your business and some of the requirements that you may run into. This next slide on the marketing options, I think that's something you'll probably be discussing with the marketing experts, not necessarily this slide, but the whole idea. But from my perspective, I think depending on, again, what you decide to sell, how you decide to sell it, to whom you decide to sell it, will determine which of these avenues you have for utilizing the slaughter and processing plants that exist here in West Virginia. So very briefly, and I won't, it's a very busy and there's a lot of information on this slide, but very briefly, if you look at the top there, we have custom exempt plants in West Virginia. And then you see in those green arrows, the commercial slaughter plants. And let's just look at those for the moment. And you might be wondering, well, what's the difference between the two? Well, we license both of those here in West Virginia. But the difference is if we're talking about a commercial slaughter plant, we will check every animal that is slaughtered at that establishment. I mean, we check it alive and we check it after it's been stunned. We're checking the health of that animal, the behavior of that animal, and that then allows that product to be ultimately sold in the public or in commerce, as we might say, as compared to the custom exempt plants where we do license those plants and we do monitor sanitation, record keeping, some humane handling and other things, but we do not provide animal by animal inspection. And therefore, those resulting products are limited to pretty much going back to the owner of those animals. And so, as I mentioned earlier, if you're planning on trying to accommodate individual customers that they're producers, they really just want some meat put away for themselves, they probably don't have to use a commercial slaughter plant. They could use a custom exempt plant. If you are the producer of the animal and a customer comes to you that says, hey, I would like to buy your animal, either whole or halves, you could potentially take those animals to a custom exempt plant as long as the recipients of those products, once they're processed, are going to use it for themselves, for their employees, or their non-paying guests. But they cannot sell those products in commerce, so they can't be sold to somebody else. And that's the limitation on the custom exempt plants. But for some purposes, totally adequate. Uh, in other cases, and in many cases, you're going to need to use a commercial slaughter plant. And if we're talking about farmers market sales, which is kind of the context a lot of what we're talking about tonight, and this series, you're going to need to use a commercial slaughter and processing plant where the animal is inspected for acceptability, it's healthy enough to enter the public food supply, and then also we do inspect the sanitation in the plant, the labeling of the products, a number of other things takes place, but our inspectors are there watching it very closely. And then at the very bottom, I will be talking about some exemptions that we have specific to West Virginia, the poultry and the rabbit exemption, and I'll talk about those later. So I'm just going to move on and keep this rolling. So when I mentioned the commercial plants, um, if an inspector checks the animal and the animal passes inspection, then ultimately those products are going to receive the mark of inspection, as we call it. And if it's at a federal plant, you'll see this mark of inspection coming from on the left side. It'll say U.S. inspected and passed by the Department of Agriculture. Or if it's at our state inspected plants, it'll have that emblem or the outside outline of West Virginia, and it'll have the acronym INSP and PSD, which is inspected and passed. We will also have a number in there, and each plant, whether it's federally inspected, i.e. USDA inspected, or state inspected under WVDA, each plant will have a specific and unique number. And so that number we can then track a package of product back to a particular establishment and know that they were the ones that produced it. But the bottom line take-home message from this slide is you want to see this sort of mark of inspection on your products coming out of the plant if you intend to sell them to the public. If they don't have these marks of inspection, then likely there is a problem, a miscommunication at the plant, something, but it's a problem that would need to be worked out. The other difference I might point out here is if you intend to sell your products, meat or poultry products, across the state lines, then the Federal Meat Inspection Act does require that the inspection of the animal take place at a USDA inspected plant and not at a state inspected plant. If you're only going to be selling those meat and poultry products here in the state of West Virginia, then either of those two types of commercial plants, state or federal, will work. As compared to the custom exempt plants, where there may be a mark showing under what license, custom license it was slaughtered, a specific number that identifies that plant. But the big message here, big part of that label is it's going to say on there, not for sale, which means not for sale. And quite a bit of the work that our compliance officer does is pointing out to folks who are trying to sell product that says not for sale, that it's not for sale. We want to get the word out that if it's a custom, if the animal is slaughtered at a custom exempt facility, then there's really only one outcome for that product, and that is that it has to go back to the owner of that product. And you might be wondering, well, with these different options, state, federal, commercial, custom, where in the world could I figure out where this information is? Well, here's, I can't click on this and show you the web screen live, but you're, I believe, going to probably have access to this PowerPoint presentation, and you'll be able to type in at least part of these links and get to our WVDA website where we have this information. And I'm going to show you in the next slide, I think, what it looks like. And then also for the USDA plants that may be in West Virginia, they also have a site where you can whittle it down and eventually figure out which plants in West Virginia are federally inspected. So speaking only for the West Virginia Department of Agriculture, if you Google West Virginia Department of Agriculture or however you may get there, if you get to our homepage, you're going to see our commissioner's face and it'll say welcome, and well, you're on our WVDA homepage. And along the top in the white there, you'll see different choices, license forms, divisions, ag business, and so forth. And to get to some of this information, you would want to just hover your cursor over the division section. There should be a drop-down box that will show you the information there. Starts with COVID-19, goes down. One of the choices being meat and poultry inspection. If you then slide your cursor down and hover over top of that, another drop-down box will appear to the left, and you see commercial, contacts, custom, commercial map, distributors, and some other information. That is where a large part of the information that you might be interested in would be available. And so a list of our commercially inspected establishments would come up in, I think, PDF form if you were to click then on the commercial tab there on the left menu. And okay, so let me just stop there for a second before I go on to the next slide and see if there are any questions.
You answered the one question, well, kind of. How many federal inspection plants are located in West Virginia was the question that was in the chat.
So it does change, but at the moment, I'm going to assume that you're talking about slaughter plants. So as far as slaughter processing plants in West Virginia, West Virginia under USDA inspection, there's probably about 6. Well, there's a little bit more than that now. Probably about 8, 9 USDA inspected slaughter processing plants in West Virginia. Under state inspection, think we're around probably 15, 16. So there's probably a little more in the way of state inspected slaughter processing plants. And that's important, obviously, if you're a producer of livestock or poultry, you're going to have to find a slaughter plant. And that there are certain sections in West Virginia that are a little bit in a deficit. The producers have to travel, take their animals quite a ways to find a slaughter processing plant. So hope that answers your question, but it does change from time to time, and we want to see that. And the number has gone up in both cases for the last 5 years. There's been some growth in the number of establishments here in West Virginia, both state and federal. So we like that. We like to see that because that is, we think, good for the state as a whole, not just the producers, but for the processors and ultimately for the consumers. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have one around the chicken. So I know there's exemption if you sell within the state, but what about if you're looking across state lines? Is there USDA poultry? Is there any in the state processing of poultry that where you're legal to cross state lines for resale?
So as far as what you're talking about then would be a federally inspected poultry plant.
Correct.
The only federally inspected poultry slaughter and processing plant is the Pilgrim's Pride plant over in Moorfield. The problem though is they really only operate with their contracted growers. And so they're not going to take in birds just from the general public. You would be under a contract with them to be able to supply them with birds. And obviously they're looking for large growers that's going to produce, hundreds of thousands of birds. Outside of that, we have one state inspected poultry plant over in the Eastern Panhandle in Martinsburg that handles the, smaller flocks. But as you mentioned, if you're looking to take the product across state lines, you'll need a USDA inspected plant.
So that kind of you run into an issue there because where I'm on the border of Virginia, we do business over there, so it kind of runs us into an issue to expand into poultry, but not being able to take it across state lines.
Right.
So okay.
Right. And you might want to inquire in Virginia to see if there are any options, across the lines in Virginia, either state or federal. I'm just not familiar with, all the plants over on the Virginia side of things.
Sure. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else? Okay, so let's assume then that you have your product inspected at either a federal or state commercial plant. If you're going to be storing that product on your premises overnight for distribution throughout the state or wherever it's going to go, then you are required to get our distributor's license. And again, it doesn't matter whether it's federally inspected product or state inspected product. Our code requires that you get a license, and specifically the distributor's license, from our office to be able to store that product, let's say overnight, within the state of West Virginia. sometimes the scenario exists where you might work out with a plant to hold on to your product in their freezer for some time, and perhaps you're not actually storing it on your premises overnight. In that case, we would not expect you to have a distributor's license. But most of our plants do not offer that for any length of time, simply because they have a limited amount of storage space. There may be some other options that develop over the next several years in terms of, let's say, cold storage, that where you can pay somebody to store your product under refrigeration. Specifically, we're thinking frozen, and then go and pick it up from there for distribution. And again, if that was to be the scenario or the case for you, we wouldn't expect you to have a distributor's license. For this distributor's license, there is an application that you would fill out. I'm going to show you in a second where you'll find that. What will happen is once you fill out that application, our compliance officer will reach out to you, schedule a time to come out and take a look at where you plan to store that product. We have a guidance document also that we intend to get out. We don't have it posted to the website yet, but we can get it to you. And it's generally it's just general guidance as to what we would expect. Things like wherever that product is going to be stored needs to be obviously held under proper sanitation, not just within the freezer, but also around the freezer. The labeling on that product needs to be appropriate. It needs to be separated from any personal products. Just some general things like that, and some suggestions as well. For example, we advise that you keep temperatures, check the temperatures of your freezer on a regular basis, and then we advise you to go ahead and write that down so that you have a record of what the temperatures have been in your freezer, whether that's once a day or once a week. Any records is better than no records. And remember, you are selling this product to the public. And so should there ever be an issue, for your sake, it's probably better to have records to support that you are holding that product under the appropriate conditions. We do not expect this distributor's license if you are just using the poultry or rabbit exemptions, and I'm going to talk about them in just a second. But the distributor's license really is intended for commercial product. If you have commercial product you're storing on your premises, and then also using the poultry or rabbit exemptions, then the compliance officer will likely take a look at the exempted poultry and rabbit products there. We do expect them to be separated. That does not mean a separate freezer, but within that freezer, those different species of product needs to be held separately, and certainly any personal products need to be separate. Again, we've got this guidance document, and probably within the next month that will be on our webpage, and I'm going to show you where it will show up eventually, but at this moment it's not there. We can provide it to you. I can send it via email without a problem. And briefly, I want to talk about those two exemptions. So we have a poultry exemption and a rabbit exemption in West Virginia. They are specific to West Virginia. There are other states that also recognize or has exemptions for poultry and perhaps for rabbits, but their specific requirements are likely to be a little different than ours. And ultimately, the exempted products that come from either the poultry or rabbit exemption here in West Virginia are restricted to sales within West Virginia. Now, that doesn't prevent somebody from another state from coming into West Virginia, buying that product, and taking it back to their respective state for their consumption. But they cannot take it back to that other state and then sell it there. And the same could be said even of the state inspected product. So if you have state inspected beef cuts and you're selling them at a farmer's market and you're very close to a state line, and somebody from another state comes in, they buy those products here, and then they drive back across the state line, there is absolutely no issue with that. They just can't go back to the other state and then begin to sell those products. So let's look at the poultry exemptions in West Virginia real quick. And first, I want to point out there are two parts. There's the 1,000 bird exemption and the 20,000 bird exemption. Both essentially have the same requirements. You're probably wondering, well, what's the difference? Well, you have to choose one of those two exemptions to use in any given calendar year. You can't just get to 1,000 and let's say September and say, well, I'm going to go ahead and jump over to the 20,000 and get a few more birds in. It's one or the other that you choose at the beginning of the year. 1,000 birds is quite a few birds, by the way. I mean, when you go to raising these birds and processing them, 1,000 is pretty good. We've got, I would say, a handful or a dozen at most of producers around the state that are actually using the 20,000 bird exemption, simply because of the sheer volume of or time involved and logistics involved with raising several thousand birds. There is well, I'll get to it in a second, but there's another requirement for the 20,000 bird exemption, and that involves the facility that you're using. You'll see in just a second, we're not too restrictive, I guess is the best way to put it when it comes to the 1,000 bird exemption. The 20,000 bird exemption, because of the volume, we have some expectations that there's more of a facility that's cleanable, that it's done in a more organized fashion, if you will. But both of these exemptions allows for you as the producer to raise these birds and sell these birds to the public, and they are technically uninspected, at least not by us. They're not inspected by us, rather they're inspected by you as the producer. So therefore, one of the requirements is the birds must be healthy as best you can determine when they're slaughtered and processed on the farm where they are raised. And all of that is very important. You have to be, as the producer, the judge of whether they're healthy or not. And we can provide, if there's some doubt or there's some questions as to, what is this bird healthy or not, there are references that we can provide, or we can, give you some advice perhaps. But another part of this is that you must raise those birds on your farm, your premises. And you then have to be the person who slaughters and processes those birds, packages them, and then sells them. So you cannot take your birds to your neighbor down the road and have them do it for you, nor can they bring them in for you to do because you just like doing it. It's really the producer exemption where you do it all. Of course, they do need to be processed in a sanitary manner. There are some labeling requirements, and you can see there on the label, it must include the product name, like whole chicken, chicken half, chicken tenders, chicken wings, the processor's name and address, so that's usually the farm name and address, a net weight statement of how much does the product weigh that does not include the packaging materials. So if you put a little soaker pad inside of the package, that weight is not included. It is just simply the weight of the product inside the package. The safe handling instructions, I'm going to go over in just a second, and the pack date. So those things are required on the actual label. We do not allow claims because there is no method in place for us to be able to verify claims, at least not on the package. And typically when we're talking about claims, we're thinking of pasture raised, grass fed, corn fed, whatever, something like that would be an example of a raising claim. You can communicate that, how you raise the birds, through social media, through pamphlets or binders, videos at the point of purchase, on your website, or however. But if it's on the label of the package, then we really don't want to see claims on there because we cannot substantiate them. And again, it can't cross the state lines, but it can be sold here in West Virginia, and then the consumer can go back into another state to consume it. You do need to keep records. This is true for both the 1,000 and the 20,000 bird exemptions. You keep records as to who you sold the birds to for about 2 years. Now, typically, I get questions about, well, is that every person? Well, it depends. If you're at a farmer's market and you have a person comes up and they're buying one package of a whole bird, I don't think we have an expectation that you keep everybody's name who bought one bird from you. If you have somebody comes up to buy 10, I would say get their name, some information from them. If you're selling in slightly larger amounts, get their individual names. Or so then if you just do the smaller sales to individuals who only buy one or two, then I would probably just record that I was at the Charleston Farmers Market on whatever day, and I sold, 25 whole birds to various people. I think that would be enough to show, kind of your sales, the total number of birds you're selling, where you're selling them. As to the individuals, probably not necessary when they're only buying a few.
Hey,
It
Quentin,
is
I do
also
have one
voluntary
question.
registration for this exemption. It is not required. But what we will do is if you send in the registration form, we will send you a certificate to show that you have registered with the West Virginia Department of Ag. And then you may display that certificate at the point of purchase, whether it's farmer's market, on your farm, wherever those freezers are, if customers are coming to your farm. You can display that, or you can provide a copy and you can show people that you are registered. It doesn't mean that we're going to come out and start doing inspection on your farm. It just shows that you are acknowledging that you're doing it, and that, I guess, provides some reassurance to potential customers that it's not a fly by the seat of your pants sort of operation, So take that for what it's worth. There's no charge for it, and once you register for the poultry exemption, it's good until you tell us that you're not doing it anymore. For the 20,000 bird exemption, it's pretty much everything that I've already told you, but in addition, we expect that slaughter and processing to take place in some sort of enclosed structure with some ability to be cleaned. If you think about the 1,000 bird exemption, we have not set any particular requirements outside of that it must be done in a sanitary manner. Well, how does that get determined? Well, in two ways. So if the customer that you're selling this product to complains to us that this product was contaminated with feathers or manure or leaves or whatever else, then we're obligated for our compliance officer to come out and do a follow-up and try to figure out what's going on. Or if our compliance officer should find that product at a farmer's market or elsewhere where you're selling it, they're going to take a look at it. And if they should happen to see some problem, then again, they're probably going to do some follow-up with you. I'm happy to say that really does not happen, has not been happening here in West Virginia. That's a good sign that the producers are taking pride in their product. We've not had any issues and complaints. So that's kind of the checks and balances, so to speak, is, at least under the 1,000 bird exemption, we have not been too restrictive as to how you go about doing it. So, as long as there's not a problem, we're probably not going to do anything with that. But the 20,000 bird, just the volume that's involved with that, it's a necessity to have some way to keep that facility, that area where this is taking place, cleaned in order to maintain the proper sanitation. And there is also a requirement that you cannot have for the 20,000 bird exemption, you can't have more than 3,000 birds on your farm at any given time. We've had a number of conversations about that. I wouldn't worry about that part of it. If you're at that point and you have some questions, then I would just say reach out to me and we'll discuss them.
Now, we do actually have a few questions, if we can pop in there.
Absolutely.
I'll go ahead and let Shelley go ahead, and then I'll ask a second one. Go ahead, Shelley.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So there's 1,000 bird exemption and a 20,000. So does that mean the producer cannot go above 1,000 birds?
In a year's time, yes.
In a year's time. And I'm just curious, and you might not even know this, how did that come about? I mean, that's like a wide range, 1,000 to 20,000. I'm just curious.
Sure, no, it's a good question. So the Poultry Products Inspection Act, which is a federal law, allows for some exemptions, and West Virginia in, I guess, 2015 or thereabouts adopted they adopted and slightly modified, I guess is the best way to put it, two poultry exemptions that both are called the producer grower exemptions. And one of them is the 1,000 bird exemption and the other is the 20,000 bird exemption, with, some slight differences, but very much similar. And they're based on the federal exemptions. They're based upon that federal exemption that came out of the Poultry Products Inspection Act. So there was, except for this part about the 3,000 birds, that was purely a West Virginia inserted part, they really are based upon federal requirements. Slightly
Okay.
modified, but based upon federal requirements.
Yeah. My other question, so the person that asked about being on the state line near Virginia, but is in West Virginia, if they have their birds, if they take the birds across into Virginia and have them processed at a licensed facility, and they don't bring them back across state lines, I mean, can they take them directly from the facility to a farmer's market or sell them there in Virginia?
So, a good question. So if the facility in Virginia that the West Virginia producer goes to is a federally inspected facility, then they can take it anywhere in the United States. They can bring it in back into West Virginia, or they could sell it there in Virginia. If they take it to a Virginia state inspected poultry facility, then they would need to sell those poultry products in the state of Virginia.
Okay, and that would be the same for other, like beef or anything else. They could
That's
take it
correct.
across there, but it had to be a federally inspected facility, and they would have, or sorry, a state, if it could be a state inspected facility as long as the product stays there and does not come back across.
That's correct.
Sorry, if they want to sell it there. Okay.
Right. If it was under a state inspection in Virginia, then it must be sold within the state of
Right.
within the state of Virginia.
All right. Thanks.
Yep, no problem.
And then one more thing, if you could go back one slide, and this is a question that I get, one more slide. I get it quite a few times, maybe one more, where producers ask, I want to do 1,000 bird processing. I want to do it on my farm. My neighbor, and you mentioned this, and I want it to be reiterated on film. And they go, my neighbor has birds. Can they bring theirs over to my place? Absolutely not. Right? Right.
That's correct. At the moment,
Okay.
it has not changed. We are looking at, so when I say we, the department, meat inspection specifically, within the West Virginia Department of Ag, we're looking to see if there's some way to, at least in some limited cases, allow for some combined effort and use as it pertains to doing some of these poultry processing
Trailers. Yeah.
operations.
And that's where the question comes from, is they want, I believe people would like to share rentals, but that's not what, they could rent it at each individual farm site because the exemption is for your farm, not necessarily the birds.
That's correct. Now, as far as the equipment goes, it is certainly acceptable for the equipment to be lent,
Move.
leased, rented to other people, other farms. We do not control the the equipment is not what we're licensing. It's that the birds were raised on that farm, and there's the intent of these exemptions, and the same for the rabbit when we get to it, is that it's raised and processed on the same farm, the same premise. That's the intent of these exemptions.
Thank you.
Could they,
Thank you for bringing that up.
sorry, could they register? What if they formed a cooperative? Could they do that? Like,
So again, we're looking at to see if anything like that is possible and still live within the idea of the exemption. If we exceed what the federal exemption allows out of the Poultry Products Inspection Act, the feds could have some objections to what we are allowing, and that would raise some real issues for our staff to deal with. So we're looking to see, is there anything that can be done to allow for some of this, but at the moment, nothing has been solidified. And so at the moment, yes, you pretty much need to follow the idea that the birds need to be slaughtered and processed on the farm where they were raised by the person who raised them, and not, the sharing of the equipment is not an issue, but taking them to another location for processing is an issue.
Thank you so much for clarifying that.
Sure.
So
And,
that
when
easy
we,
to understand.
sure. And you know, if there is a change or we're able to, what should I say, expand or modify a little bit of this, we'll communicate it out in the same fashion. We'll get we'll get the word out as best we can. All I can say is for right now that, you know, we're still at that point of trying to find a sustainable, you know, from a regulatory standpoint, something that we can allow without having to come back somewhere down the road and say, no, you can't do that anymore.
And we have another question in the chat, and this is a question too that I've seen in the past. We own our own poultry processing trailer and also raise birds under the exemption. We have people ask if we can process their birds if we bring the trailer to their farm. Would this be allowed, or can we do this on our property?
So the answer to that is going to be no to both of those questions, because as soon as you do that for them, you are becoming a custom slaughterer. Essentially, you are providing that service to them. That's going to require a license from us, and to get the license, there are certain facility requirements, so to speak. In other words, it's going to have to be it's going to have equipment. It's going to have a building that is cleanable, and there's quite a bit that goes into that, and that's going to be probably restrictive. The one part of that that could happen is you could rent the mobile slaughter unit for somebody else to take and use on their farm. That's not a problem. But for the owner of the unit to go with the unit and provide services, you know, to that other farmer, that's where it starts to get into the realm of needing a custom exempt license or custom or commercial license. The bottom line is for either custom or commercial, there's certain facility requirements that are not going to just a mobile slaughter unit that's open, you know, it's an open top, not enclosed mobile slaughter unit, is not going to live up to those requirements.
Okay, I think that's all the questions we have for now.
Okay. We can discuss any other ones on the poultry exemption later, but let me move on to the rabbit exemption. And again, there are a lot of similarities here, but there are a couple of differences. One of which is that there is only one rabbit exemption in West Virginia, and it's just the 20,000 rabbit exemption, which means that you can slaughter up to a total of 20,000 healthy rabbits per year here in West Virginia, and that's on the farm. The reason I you know, kind of stress on farm, there is another part of the exemption that would allow plants to do that, but most of our plants do not have the time or facility to be able to do it, so pretty much nobody does it. So it's really an on-farm exemption. They, like the poultry, must be raised on the farm and then slaughtered, processed on that same farm by the owners. They can be sold here in the state. We do allow wholesale, you know, so in other words, you can sell to a grocery store who would possibly resell that product. This rabbit exemption is not patterned the same as the poultry exemptions, so we had maybe just a little bit more flexibility with it. And again, this part of the rabbit exemption didn't come into existence until about 2014-ish, 2015, about the same time as poultry. The labeling requirements are essentially the same. The pack date, I will say for that, whether we're talking poultry or rabbits, pack date could be the date of slaughter, or it could potentially be the day after slaughter. We would accept either one, because sometimes people are chilling those carcasses overnight before they package them. So either of those 2 days could be the appropriate date. Once again, you must have records for and keep those records for a couple of years. Our compliance officer may want to see those. In this case, there are some things that are mandatory as compared to voluntary or optional. You do need to register. If somebody's going to use this rabbit exemption, you need to register with our office. There is a registration form. There is no fee for the form, but it does get renewed annually based upon our state fiscal year. So the license runs from July 1st until June 30th of the following year. As a part of that registration, there are procedures that we require. They don't have to be extremely detailed, but they need to give us an idea of how you're going to go about the slaughter and processing part of that operation. And there is a model set of procedures that typically we supply along with the registration form to give you an idea of how you might lay out what you're going to do. But we do want to see in some form or fashion the steps that you're going to take that live rabbit all the way to a packaged product. Once again, no distributor's license would be required unless you're also storing inspected meat or poultry products on your premises. In both the poultry exemption and the rabbit exemption, one of the requirements for the labeling is that it must have safe handling instructions. And here on the screen, you see two examples. On the one side is the safe handling instructions for inspected meat and poultry. It's in that green outline. And if you'll notice at the top, under safe handling instructions, it says, this product was prepared from inspected and passed meat and or poultry. That is what you're going to find on all the raw products that you'll buy at a grocery store, or even commercial products that you'd buy at a farmer's market should have that same statement and same set of instructions on it. However, for the uninspected, in other words, exempted rabbit and poultry products, you cannot have the safe handling instructions that include that statement because they did not go through official inspection by a third party. So that statement has to be removed. There are some JPEG files that I have, kind of like the one that's in red where that statement is removed. That's the sort of safe handling instructions that you should be putting on that package of exempted poultry or exempted rabbit products. You can reach out to some butcher supply shops, but be careful if you're buying rolls of these safe handling instructions. Almost always they're going to have that statement on it. So just be careful there. And should you need a JPEG file that is appropriate, you can just reach out to me. My contact information is at the end of the slides. You can reach out to me or the compliance officer, and we'll get you a JPEG file for you to use. And so I told you that I would show you where you could get to some of this information. And so once again, if you think about getting to our WVDA webpage, along the top, once again, are some choices: licenses, forms, divisions, and so forth. Instead of choosing divisions, although you can get to this page from there, the best route is to choose licenses. In other words, hover your cursor over top the word licenses, then that drop-down box will show up, and choose meat and poultry. When you choose meat and poultry, then what you see underneath with the different icons or tiles, each one of those tiles or buttons is for a different license application. So along the top, it's kind of covered up. There's commercial, slaughter, processing, custom slaughter and processing. Along the bottom, most of which you can see, is the meat and poultry distributor application. So if you clicked on that, it would take you to a PDF copy of the application that you could download and then print. And then it also has the rabbit exemption registration and the voluntary poultry exemption registration. And when you click on those, you will also be able to get to some a sheet that summarizes the requirements that I just went over. So if you click on those buttons, you'll get to the right information. Or worst case scenario, again, if you're needing more information or you can't find it, you just reach out to us and we'll get it to you, or we'll put you in the right spot. And then, of course, we've been talking about mobile slaughter units. This is not necessarily the one that the West Virginia Farmers Market Association has, but if you haven't thought about one of these, I think you should consider it if you have any significant number of birds that you need to process. This one, as an example, you see on the outside of the open top trailer, over the wheel, you've got stunning cones, bleeding cones that you would stun the birds and then bleed them as they're in that cone. That kind of restricts their movement, hopefully. It bleeds into the trough. You can catch that blood into a 5 gallon barrel or some other container. You've got kind of in the front front corner, let's say, scalding vat. Going to probably need some propane to heat that water up. There's usually a motor that turns a baffle that circulates the water and the birds in there so that the scalding process is fairly even. In the back corner, on the upper corner, is the plucking machine. From the scalder, the birds immediately go in there. There's little rubber fingers. It spins around. It knocks off most of the feathers and stuff, not all. Right beside it or behind it, you have a table where you can finish that cleaning of the outside of the bird and spray it off before you open it up to eviscerate it. And then in the back, after you've eviscerated the bird and cleaned it, rinsed it, removed head, feet, everything that needs to come off that bird. You can't see it very well, but likely that is a chill tank that you would put that bird in, along with there's probably an ice water bath there where you would want to chill that bird down pretty quickly. This is just an overview of some example of a open mobile slaughter unit. There's some other information out. I know from WVU, from Dr. Moritz. There's other information. I think maybe the West Virginia Farmers Market Association has been working on with WVU, maybe I'll let Holly speak to that in a second. What I will add, though, is to access. So the West Virginia Farmers Market Association does have they have 3 of those open top type mobile slaughter units. Not exactly necessarily like the one we just looked at, but they're perfectly adequate and set up very much the same. And they are available for poultry producers to use. And to be able to get more information on that, this is a picture of the West Virginia Farmers Market Association page, which most likely most of you are familiar with. And if you haven't noticed it, there is a tab there, and it's in the yellow circle for mobile poultry processing. If you click on that, you'll get a whole bunch of information as to what you would need to do, what the equipment can do, how to schedule it, and all the other pertinent information. Holly, anything you would like to add to that?
Yeah, I wanted to include that these units are located in Southside, sorry, not Southside anymore. Spencer, West Virginia. The one that was previously in Southside will be in Morgantown for 2025. And then our third one, the new one that we got last year, is in Bunker Hill. So that's over in the Eastern Panhandle. Oh, go ahead, Shelley.
Well, this isn't about the poultry units, but okay. So poultry has to be direct to consumer, but rabbits could be wholesale or direct to consumer. Is that correct?
So honestly, we have kind of been pretty flexible on the poultry, just like with the rabbits. Yes, you can sell those wholesale. The poultry exemption is really intended for the producer to be selling the birds, but we have been pretty gentle about that. So if you're doing the poultry sales as wholesale, as long as the product is sold here in West Virginia, ultimately, whether it's from the producer or from the retail store or whoever else may buy that from the producer, as long as it's all sold here in West Virginia, we've not had a heavy hand on that. You just obviously would want, as a producer, to record on your records that I sold 100 birds to the local grocery store.
Thanks.
Sure.
And we did have one more question in the chat. Is there a preferred method for processing rabbits? Can we use a hopper popper?
So we don't have a suggested method. You'll see in the model protocol probably a pretty vetted way of doing the rabbits. The hopper popper is one option that people have for stunning of the rabbits, and we find that to be acceptable. So if that's what you're using, we would be okay with that. It's not necessarily the only method. We just want to know what you are doing.
Okay, and I think that's all the questions there. Eric popped the link for the poultry trailer there in the chat. Thank you, Eric.
So real quick, as it relates to farmers market sales, as far as we are concerned in the Meat and Poultry Inspection Bureau, we do not have specific requirements that if you're taking inspected meat or poultry products or even the exempted poultry or rabbit products to a farmer's market, that you must have those under mechanical refrigeration. If that individual farmer's market requires that, then that's between you and that farmer's market. We only look to see is the product at the right temperature. So whether it's in a mechanically, if it's a little freezer unit that plugs into a portable generator, well, that's wonderful. We're still going to want to check the temperature of the product inside. If it's an ice chest that, it's inside of a truck bed and it's shaded, we're going to want to check the temperature of the product. Ultimately, we're concerned about the product temperature and not how you're achieving it. So that would be one thing I'd want to point out. Nutritional information is required for those poultry cuts. We do have that information free of charge. I can send that to Holly, or you can reach out to me and we can get that to you. But that information should be provided at the point of purchase. Again, our compliance officer may do some spot checks if he's at a farmer's market and see some of that being sold. I'm pretty sure he's probably going to come over and say, "Hey, let me take a look." And again, if the individual farmer's market has some other requirements, you might have to, there may be other permits you have to get. And then there's also the, farmer's market vendor permit that you have to get from the WVDA as well. This is my contact information. Our number is 558-2206. My email is qjones@wvda.us. And of course, that's our website. And I think my contact information is on there as well. But hour is kind of slipping away, but we had a lot of good questions along the way. So I'm going to stop now and see if there are any other questions.
Does anyone have anything else? My goodness, Quentin, I don't think you'll ever need to do another class. We've all got it.
That's wonderful.
Thank you so much tonight for your time and for going over all these things with us. And I will be in touch with you tomorrow to get the links for the things we talked about there, those labels and the nutritional label. We can add that in that email so everyone has a package that's kind of got everything that they need in relation to West Virginia Department of Agriculture regulations. Today's program again was funded through the Extension Risk Management Program, which was ultimately funded through the USDA's National Institute of Food and Agriculture, which is shortened to NIFA and based on the work under award number 2003-727 40447. So we got that funding acknowledgement in there. We know what number it's from, and we look forward to seeing everyone next week when we talk about marketing your meat products. We've learned about how to do it the proper way with the right regulations and making sure we've got everything right on that end. So let's get it out to those customers now and market it in the best way possible. So thank you for your time tonight, everybody. We hit it right on the dot on an hour. Thank you, Quentin, and we will see you all next week.
Thanks, everyone.